understand land until you grow up on it. Not own it, wear it. Let it stain your hands, chap your lips, grind into your knees until the dust is a second skin. You mend fences in wind so hard it turns tears to grit. You learn which gate latch sticks when it's cold and which birch creaks when rain moves in from the west. If you're lucky, the land forgives the clumsy ways you love it. And if you're luckier, it loves you back. Hello there. My name is Charlene Hayes, and what I'm about to share with you guys is all about strength, respect, and doing what it takes to keep what you love safe from those who think they're entitled to steal what belongs to you just because they can see it. It's about keeping a family legacy alive at any cost, even when all your energy is spent and you're at a loss, when you think hope, faith, and your strength to fight has died. It's at that time you get back up and keep on fighting, using the law as your shield and justice as your sword of truth. So if any of you out there have been targeted by a corrupt, greedy HOA, I hope this story inspires you to stand up for what you love and not let anyone take what is yours, fair and square. Mornings usually roll in here like ceremony. Light climbs the cottonwoods and spills in long sheets across the beige arena footing until the dust looks like slow stars. Leather sighs as it warms. A kettle thumps onto the stove. The hose knocks metal at the hydrant. You can tell the hour by the smell if you were born here. Coffee and Timothy at 6, liniment and hoof oil at 7, saddle soap and cedar by 8. Clocks belong to offices. Out here, time keeps itself. My great-grandfather raised the original barn in 1925, with lumber he milled on a borrowed saw, and a temper the family still whispers about. The indoor arena came later, after my grandfather came home from the war walking softer than he left. Dad cut the cross-country course when I was small enough to stand inside a jump standard and think it was a doorway to a braver world. We added board to board, acre to acre, not because a spreadsheet said it made sense, but because we already belonged to it. 7,500 acres in use. Another 1,500 we never touched on purpose. Dad called that part the heartbeat. Meadow and old growth that taught you humility, cottonwood ribboning the trails, birch shining at dusk, oak along the fence lines like a row of quiet old judges. Half a mile from the main barn, there's a lake the sun forgets to leave, ringed in picnic tables that have heard secrets, proposals, and more barn gossip than any court stenographer could capture. I remember the day of my 13th birthday. That morning, Dad pretended he'd forgotten. Then later on, he waved me over to the south paddock. The horse waiting beside him and Ted was 17 one-hands of dark bay opinion, a Belgian warmblood whose papers said cosmic vibe, but who snorted at me like we'd already fought and I'd already lost. Calvin, I heard myself say. Dad's grin tipped sideways. Don't worry, kid. You'll grow into him. I did. Calvin taught me the kind of honesty you learn with your seat bones when your mouth would cheat. By the first clean course, Dad leaned on the rail and said, "Some horses don't just carry you. They change you." Not long after that birthday, Dad's health began to decline in ways he tried to hide. When it became clear he needed someone he trusted to stand in for him, he asked Ted to become my godfather. Ted didn't hesitate. He stepped into that role with the same steadiness he carried into everything else in life. And when Dad passed, Ted stood beside me at the graveside in the small cemetery up the road, a quiet promise in his presence that I would never face the world alone. 5 miles further, the air changes. You can actually smell earth, not fertilizer and chlorine. The road curls along oak ridges and rolling pasture land that existed long before people started naming developments after the nature they bulldozed. That's where Cedar Creek stands. Not a facility, not a complex, but a living, working equestrian property with history in its bones. People love to romanticize country life until they have to live where it actually exists, without street signs telling them how fast to breathe, and without bylaws dictating what color their mailbox should be. Out here, the world runs on respect, stamina, and consistency, not committees and fines. Legacy land doesn't go quietly. especially not when someone already tried to steal it once and failed. It remembers who fought for it, who bled into its soil, and who came back years later thinking the second attempt would be easier than the first. Cedar Creek Equestrian Center sits 5 miles outside Woodside, California, 2 miles past where Vista Hills pretends the countryside still belongs to them. Out here the road narrows, the manicured hedges disappear, and the air stops smelling like chlorine and politics. The barns rise in quiet rhythm against a backdrop of oak, cottonwood, and birch. The beige sand in the arenas catching first light like ground glass. This land isn't themed. It isn't curated. It was worked into existence by hand, my great-grandfather's hands, then my grandfather's, then down to my father's, long before HOA boards started treating property lines like dotted suggestions. 3 grazing fields stretch beyond the arenas, each with deep water tubs and the same old oak tree still rooted dead center in the second field, older than anyone still alive to argue about jurisdiction. Past the paddocks, the trails split, right toward the ridge, left toward the cross-country course, and the far pond with the cedar dock still holding my grandfather's fishing chair. This place had a rhythm before I was born. Feed, train, turn out, teach, repeat. No committees, no intrusion. Just work, sweat, invoices, and sleep. When you drive up to it, the first thing you notice isn't the barns or the arenas. It's the quiet. Not the dead kind, the earned kind. The kind you only get when a place has been doing the same honest work for generations, without asking anyone for permission. And I wasn't doing it alone. Rhonda, tall, calm, patient, with a sense of humor that kept the staff sane, ran the operation like a quiet metronome. Her sister, Brooke, thinner and sharper, business-minded and unflappable until provoked, handled lessons and jump design. With the same precision she rode her hunter. His name was Strategic Attack in the show ring. Reggie in the barn, a tall black warm blood of a beauty. His breed? A Hanoverian Oldenburg cross that stood at 17.2 hands high. She boarded him here long before any of this nonsense ever began. Rhonda's own gelding, Alfie, domino effect. A tall 16.3 black and white appendix pinto cross with a beautiful Sabino-colored coat. He was boarded next door at Grayson's ranch where Rhonda trained barrels. These weren't employees. They were spine and blood. Nothing happened on this farm without them knowing. This is why when the first whisper floated in, a rumor about annexation, I didn't carry it alone. I didn't hide it. I said it out loud in my own tack room, with Rhonda leaning against the feed bin and Brooke tightening a noseband at the workbench. Before Karen Livingston ever set foot on my property, the 3 of us already knew she was coming. People think HOA wars start with paperwork. They don't. They start with tone, with the kind of rumor spoken like a pre-approved fact. The first time I heard it, it came through a client's mouth like recycled gossip. "They're annexing the old horse property up the road," said casually, like she was commenting on weather or a new cafe opening, not the seizure of someone else's land. I laughed it off in that polite, dismissive way you do when something is so absurd it can't possibly be real. Annex my property? Into an HOA I don't live in or belong to? That was like someone showing up at a courthouse and filing for custody of a stranger's child. Then a second client said the same thing. Same phrasing. Same development. Same name attached to it. Karen Livingston. As if the annexation weren't a proposal but already scheduled. That's when I took it to the tack room. I remember saying it out loud. Not dramatically, just flat. "They're trying to annex us into Vista Hills." Rhonda didn't laugh. She didn't question it. She just said, "Into, not around?" Brooke didn't blink either. "Annexation needs a petition signature. Yours." Exactly mine. And I hadn't signed a damn thing. That was the moment the air changed. Not panic, alignment. Before we even saw her face, the 3 of us were already on the same page. If this was coming, it wasn't coming alone. And it wasn't coming with honesty. By the time Karen showed up in person, clipboard clutched to her chest like a badge she hadn't earned, it didn't feel like an introduction. It felt like Act 2 of a play she had been performing in front of her mirror, behind closed doors. She didn't come curious or respectful. She came declarative. "We're moving forward with the annexation of this parcel into Vista Hills," she announced, as if she were reading a calendar reminder, not attempting a land grab. Not hello. Not request. Not discussion. A verdict. I didn't open the gate. I didn't step closer. I let the silence stretch until she had to feel it. When she tried again, slower this time, like she thought I hadn't understood, Brooke stepped out of the barn aisle behind me. Rhonda appeared in the doorway of the feed room. Karen saw it. I wasn't standing alone, which is why her smile looked strained when she added the threat dressed as advice. "You'll want to start preparing for compliance transition. It will make this so much easier." That was the exact second I knew two things at once. She wasn't here to negotiate, and she wasn't going to stop. Karen didn't flinch when she saw she wasn't addressing one woman. She recalibrated. Predators always do. She shifted her stance, squared her clipboard like a shield, and adopted the tone of someone reading from a policy manual written in her own head. "You'll be receiving the official documents shortly," she said, as if the annexation were a foregone conclusion and not a felony in progress. "Once integration is finalized, there will be adjustments to bring the property into compliance." As if Cedar Creek had been waiting its whole life to meet her standards. I could have listed grandfathered rights, agricultural exemptions, and county lines that made her fantasy legally impossible. I could have ended her script in one paragraph. But people like her don't stop when corrected. They stop when exposed. So I gave her nothing to work with. No argument. No emotional data. Just silence. That silence is what made her escalate. Control only feels like control when the other person reacts. She looked past me, not at me, scanning barns, pastures, arenas, trucks. Not admiring, appraising. The way someone looks at a house they've already decided to remodel before they've signed escrow. Then came her first threat, sugar-coated as courtesy. "We'll be in touch again very soon. I suggest you prepare now. It will make the transition easier." She turned and left with the gait of someone who believes paperwork outranks ownership and certainty outranks consent. She was wrong, but she didn't know it yet. That evening, the farm was physically unchanged. Same horses chewing hay, same sound of hoof picks against concrete, same rhythm as always. But the peace was altered. Threats don't have to leave marks to shift a landscape. Once someone declares they are coming for what is yours, even silence becomes charged. That was the beginning, not of annexation, but of war. People think the first strike in an HOA war is a letter or a meeting. It never is. The first strike is narrative, whispered just loudly enough to infect other people's mouths before you ever get a chance to contradict it. Within a week, clients started asking questions they never would have invented on their own. "Are you really being forced under Vista Hills? Is it true they're taking over the property? I heard they're going to clean this place up once it's annexed. Is that happening soon?" As if a 7,500-acre working agricultural property needed validation from a development that hires teenagers to mow identical lawns. None of these borders were malicious. They were repeating what had been ceded, which meant Karen hadn't just visited, she had already begun broadcasting. Annexation wasn't being planned, it was being marketed. Rumor has one job: shake confidence. And it worked. One of my long-term lesson families canceled entirely, not because of anything that had actually changed, but because of what they believed was about to. Doubt costs nothing to spread. Undoing it costs everything. Brooke was the first to call it what it was. She's not negotiating, she's conditioning. Rhonda didn't bother with theory. She said what mattered. Then she expects resistance. Good, because that's all she's going to get. Because there is a fundamental difference between people who want compliance and people who intend to break you into it. Karen was the second kind. So before a single document ever arrived, before a single violation was printed, before a single lawyer's name appeared on a header, the war had already begun. And that was before anyone touched the utilities. The first physical interference wasn't dramatic. It was diagnostic. The water line to the north paddocks didn't burst. It didn't leak. It was turned. By hand. Someone crossed a fence line, walked onto agricultural land, passed warning signs, and cut off water to livestock to see two things: how long it would take us to notice, how we would respond. The second strike came a week later. Evening chores, lights on, horses in aisles, when the barn power tripped. Except breakers don't trip when the panel has been opened and the toggles manually cut. Those weren't accidents. They were pressure tests. That's when Rhonda looked at me and said, "She's mapping your reactions." And she was right. This wasn't random vandalism. This was behavioral surveillance. Someone was rehearsing escalation before committing to it. That was the night I called Ted. Who's Ted, you're asking? Well, let me fill you in a bit on the backstory of our relationship. Long before Cedar Creek ever became my fight, my dad, Captain Arthur Hayes, was serving overseas during the Desert Storm War. That's where he met Corporal Ted Redding and Corporal Frank Hunter. The three of them were on patrol when they stumbled into what they thought was a dry ditch. Only it wasn't. It was a trap laid by the enemy, rigged with explosives set on a 1-minute timer. Most men would have panicked, but not Dad. He kept his head, tore apart his own web gear to make a rope, and pulled both Ted and Frank out before the timer could run down. Then, without thinking twice, he jumped back into that pit and defused the bomb himself, with seconds to spare. He saved their lives that day. And from that moment on, Ted and Frank swore they'd never forget it. When I was 13, Dad asked Ted to be my godfather, and he's been in my life even longer than I remember. Frank's like my uncle, loud, loyal, and always 2 steps ahead of trouble. Ted climbed the ladder through homicide, eventually starting his own PI firm after making lieutenant. And Frank took the tough route through narcotics. But no matter where life pulled them, they never stopped looking out for me after Dad passed. I actually met Grayson through Frank, one of those chance introductions that stuck. So when people wonder why those 2 men still stand by my side after all these years, the answer's simple. My father once saved their lives, and now, in their own way, they're making sure his legacy, and his daughter, never fall into danger again. So when I called him, it wasn't because I was scared, because the problem had crossed the line from irritation into intent. You don't call a retired homicide detective over gossip or flyers. You call him when someone breaches infrastructure on private land. He didn't hesitate. He didn't ask, "Are you sure?" He asked only one thing. "How long has this been happening without you telling me?" Shame isn't what I felt. Clarity is. I had been treating a siege like an argument. Ted came before sunrise the next morning. He walked the property like a crime scene, not a farm. Slow, silent, scanning for pattern instead of mess. He checked the panel, the shut-off valves, the lock hardware, the fence lines, the likely approach paths. He didn't speak until he had a full picture. When he did, it wasn't a question. It was a diagnosis. This isn't spontaneous. Someone is staging pressure, not testing boundaries. Staging pressure. Pressure precedes takeover. And that was before he found the forged annexation form. Before Ted ever touched the county records, I told him everything Karen had said at the gate. Her tone, her wording, the certainty in her delivery. He didn't react with disbelief or shock. He reacted like someone hearing a crime reenactment, not a neighbor dispute. Then I told him about the flyers, unsigned, tucked under windshield wipers, accusing the farm of being unsafe and unregulated, about the anonymous posts on Vista Hills Forum calling Cedar Creek financially unstable, about the notes placed on my property, not mailed, the kind written by people who want to intimidate without being traceable. "You should just join now before this gets worse," Resistance makes this harder. You will lose more if you fight. Cowards with stationery. Ted didn't bother with commentary. He said one sentence. She's softening the ground before the real strike. Because that's how organized harassment works. You don't start with force. You start with doubt, then social isolation, then disruption, then sabotage. And only then do you move to seizure. He told me not to confront her, not to respond, not to correct the rumors. Silence isn't weakness, he said. Silence confuses strategists. Within 48 hours, he had county documents in hand, and that was when the first undeniable felony surfaced. Not speculation, not rumor, not pressure. An annexation petition already filed with my parcel number, my name, and a forged signature. He didn't tell me over the phone. He drove back to put the file in my hand. You're not dealing with influence, he said. You're dealing with fraud. And fraud changes the rules. There's a psychological shift that happens the moment something crosses from harassment into crime. You stop asking why they're doing it and start asking who else is involved. Because people don't commit felonies alone, not ones this organized. Ted didn't waste time chasing Karen's personality. He started tracing her infrastructure. He pulled HOA financial records, public access, and board meeting minutes through a county contact. What he found was not hesitation or debate. The board wasn't considering annexation. They were funding preparations for it. Line items disguised as allocated outreach expenditures tied directly to pending compliance transition. They were using other homeowners' dues to bankroll a hostile takeover of land they did not own. Karen wasn't a rogue president acting alone. She had backing. And yet something bothered Ted more than the money. The tone of the board minutes. They didn't talk like people attempting a thing. They talked like people who had been promised an outcome. People only speak with certainty when someone has guaranteed them victory, which meant someone had told them this would succeed. That's when Ted stopped looking at what Karen was doing and began looking at why she believed she could not fail. And motive is never born in the present, it's inherited. He started pulling Karen's history backward, not forward. Pre-HOA, pre-board, pre-Vista Hills. That was when the first familiar name surfaced. Livingston. Not a coincidence. Not a random stranger, a bloodline. He didn't tell me yet. He waited until he had proof. And while he dug backward, Karen escalated forward. Escalation always reveals intent. The tone of the flyers shifted from concerns to accusations. Anonymous emails reached longtime clients warning them this property would soon be shut down. 2 students pulled their contracts in the same 24 hours, both citing instability. Not instability that existed, instability that was engineered. Brooke said it plainly. She's not just trying to take the land, she's trying to starve it first. And she wasn't wrong. Financial constriction is the oldest siege tactic on record. Outlast the resources and the walls fall on their own. Ted's reaction wasn't emotional. It was procedural. Good, he said. Pressure makes people sloppy. He wasn't trying to stop her yet. He was letting her overextend so the evidence would be unavoidable when we buried her. When he came back the following visit, he didn't bring paperwork. He brought a name. He stood in my kitchen the way detectives stand before presenting a warrant. I know why she's doing it, he said. But I'm not giving you theory. I'm waiting until I have confirmation. Then he asked questions he already knew the answers to. Not for information, but for alignment. Years my family had owned this land. Who testified in the old case? Who Margaret targeted then? What was at stake? He was tracing motive by lineage, not by geography. 2 days later, he returned with the folder. Thin, but lethal. He set it on the table without opening it. Her mother wasn't Gloria Ellington, he said. She was Margaret Livingston. There it was. Not coincidence, not policy, not ambition. Karen's not annexing you, Ted said. She's finishing her mother's war. And once a motive roots in vengeance, there is no de-escalation. There is only collision. Everything that had happened, the rumors, the flyers, the sabotage, the forged petition, reframed itself in one instant. It wasn't an HOA power play. It was an inherited vendetta with a clipboard. Karen wasn't building something new. She was resurrecting a defeated war and refighting it in her mother's name. And people driven by vengeance don't negotiate and don't fatigue. They escalate until they are either stopped or destroyed. Ted didn't soften the delivery. He stated the trajectory. She will not back down, he said. She is not trying to win a dispute. She is trying to erase a family victory that put her mother in prison. That changed my role in it. I wasn't defending property anymore. I was finishing a war that didn't start with me but would damn well end with me. I didn't pace, didn't rant, didn't grab a phone. I sat there and let the clarity settle like a dropped blade. This was no longer harassment. It was legacy warfare. And legacy wars are not fought emotionally. They are litigated with precision. Ted didn't ask what I intended to do. He could read it in my face before I said it. I picked up the forged annexation form and held it the way people hold evidence, not threats. She wants a war, I said. Calm. Final. Then she's got one. Ted didn't congratulate. He redirected. Then from this point forward, you stop reacting. You start documenting. Everything she does becomes evidence, not injury. That was the moment the posture inverted. I was no longer the hunted. I was the archivist of her conviction. The farm didn't look any different after that decision. Same fences, same hay nets, same horses dropping grain on the mats. But nothing was the same. Once you reclassify an act as evidence, it loses its power to intimidate. The flyers were no longer harassment, they were exhibits. The sabotage was no longer threat, it was proof. The forged annexation wasn't an attempt, it was a felony. And once you rename a thing correctly, you strip it of the control it had over you. The next morning, before feedings were even done, I pulled a new binder out of the office cabinet, labeled the spine in black ink. HOA War, Evidence A. Not drama, not conflict. War documented. From that moment forward, nothing Karen Livingston did would land without consequence. And we hadn't even played our first card yet. Ted wasn't the only person she had underestimated. She had no idea who else stood behind Cedar Creek. Legally, tactically, and geographically, Vista Hills thought they were annexing a lone woman with a farm. They hadn't yet learned they were trespassing on a network. Most HOA boards make the same mistake. They assume isolation. They think the target is a single household behind one fence, not a system with roots and allies. Karen assumed she was cornering me. She never checked what else she was actually walking into. 2 miles past Vista Hills, beyond the last mailbox they think they control, sits not just Cedar Creek, but the adjoining ranch belonging to Grayson Alexander. 2,250 acres of working land tied to mine at the property line like a second spine. She targeted him for the same 2 reasons she targeted me. His land touches mine, which made it part of the HOA's fantasy map. Someone told her he was my boyfriend. I'm not confirming that, nor am I denying it. What she never bothered to learn, what she didn't even know to Google, was who he is. Grayson isn't a horse guy with acreage. He is a retired Navy SEAL, black operations, later commissioned into military police, lieutenant rank. He is not the kind of man who loses sleep over clipboard authority. Before he deployed on a classified assignment, he signed temporary POA to the only person he trusts without condition, Frank Hunter. Frank isn't a ranch hand. He is a former narcotics detective who was once kidnapped by cartel traffickers and lived because Grayson led the Black Ops breach that pulled him out before the building detonated. People like Karen think they are dealing with suburban resistance. They are, in reality, breaking into a circle forged in fire. While Grayson was gone, Frank wasn't just maintaining the ranch, he was expanding it. He acquired another 1,800 acres bordering both Grayson's land and mine, creating a continuous triangular block of controlled territory that will revert fully to Grayson when he returns. So when Vista Hills plotted annexation, they weren't drafting paperwork over one parcel ridden by lesson kids. They were drawing their jurisdiction line across a combined empire that includes legacy agricultural land, a combat-trained former SEAL, a narcotics detective with POA, and a retired homicide investigator already building the case. Karen Livingston walked into a war her mother lost once. She never checked that this time she is outnumbered, outranked, and outresourced. Karen Livingston thought she was reviving a clean fight. A simple HOA annexation she could bulldoze through with confidence and signatures. What she didn't account for is that timing changes inheritance. Her mother's war was against men. My father, my grandfather, attorneys, surveyors. Karen was not fighting landowners in their 50s and 60s with no defense network. She was fighting me, and I was not standing alone. Rhonda and Brooke weren't just witnesses. They were already cataloging. Every flyer, every rumor, every note placed on the property was photographed, dated, and logged before Ted ever asked for it. They were not bystanders to my problem. They were co-owners of the defense. Karen assumed I was a single target. She didn't see 3 women already on alert. A homicide detective already circling her paper trail, a combat veteran's land tied to mine, and a narcotics detective with POA monitoring the perimeter. She thought she was dragging a horse farm into an HOA. She didn't realize she was trespassing into a fortified legacy with a documented history of beating her bloodline once already. In court, under oath, with prison as the outcome. Margaret Livingston lost round 1. Karen Livingston intends to finish it, and I intend to bury it permanently. The day after Ted confirmed the forgery and the motive, something in me leveled, not hardened, aligned. You don't fight a war you didn't choose with panic. You fight it with record-keeping and patience. That morning I walked into the office, opened the binder I had labeled, and logged the first entry. Exhibit 1. Forged annexation petition, filed without consent. Brooke was standing at the desk beside me when I wrote it. She didn't ask what we were doing. She nodded once and started a second binder for digital duplicates. Rhonda started a chain of custody log without being told. This is the part outsiders never understand. Barn women don't fold. They file. Every note, every flyer, every tampered utility line was no longer an insult. It was ammunition. And while Karen Livingston thought we were still in the convince them stage, we were already in the catalog and prosecute stage. Ted hadn't even shown our hand yet. Grayson wasn't even home yet. Frank hadn't even begun his part. And Karen was already stacking charges for us, in writing, with witnesses. She believed she was forcing us into compliance. All she was doing was building the evidence wall she would eventually be buried under. Karen Livingston escalated exactly on schedule, because people who believe they are inevitable always do. The next phase wasn't rumor and it wasn't utilities. It was financial chokehold. Anonymous pamphlets began appearing in mailboxes of boarders and clients, not on cars now, but at their homes, warning them they could be held liable if they continued to participate in an unregulated facility expected to face legal action. The language was deliberate, not unsafe, not unethical, but legally risky, designed to trigger self-preservation in people with families and mortgages. Within a week, 2 additional families suspended their lessons indefinitely until this is resolved. Not because they believed Karen, but because fear is cheaper than loyalty. Brooke didn't rage, she analyzed. She's trying to collapse your revenue stream before litigation hits. Rhonda didn't second guess. She documented. Loss of business due to malicious interference, she said, as she logged each cancellation on an evidence sheet. It wasn't emotional here. It was procedural. Because once you know someone is not trying to inconvenience you but to bankrupt you, you stop reacting like a victim and start preparing like a plaintiff. Karen still believed she was the aggressor. She hadn't yet realized she had already crossed the line into a criminal case with 3 witnesses and a retired detective taking notes against her, and it was still early. She hadn't even done the worst thing yet. The third wave made it unmistakable that this was not incompetence. It was orchestration. Feed delivery that had been reliable for 8 years was suddenly misrouted twice in 1 month. Same supplier, same driver, same weekday, never before an issue. When Brooke called to confront it, the dispatcher hesitated before admitting someone had phoned in authorization to delay until annexation review was finalized. Authorization that didn't come from us, meaning someone impersonated ownership to interfere with operations. That wasn't harassment. That was deliberate interference with livestock care, a chargeable offense. Then came the email, not anonymous this time, but masked through a spoofing service, sent to my accountant, not me, alleging pending legal seizure and urging that company funds be held in protective compliance. That message wasn't meant to scare. It was meant to destabilize cash flow. Ted didn't react with surprise. He reacted with validation. "This is escalation phase 3, he said. "She's building toward a forced collapse." People like Karen never go directly to destruction. They condition the collapse first, so when the final blow comes, it looks like inevitability instead of sabotage. But she still believed she was writing her own ending. She hadn't yet understood that from the moment the forgery was documented, the ending was no longer hers to write. Because what she had not calculated, what she could not have known, was that this time she wasn't attacking a man with a sick father and no backup. She was attacking a woman with documentation, witnesses, a detective, a seal, and a POA landholder, all already in motion before she ever filed her second paper. And she still hadn't hit the line that would bury her. That line was coming fast. Pressure campaigns always climax in one of 2 directions. Either the target folds, or the attacker escalates into a mistake. Karen escalated. She stopped attacking the business and started attacking the animals. It began with something small enough to deny, a slashed mesh hay net that could be dismissed as wear, except the cut was clean and intentional. Then a salt block laced with something caustic was found in the gelding's turnout. Not enough to kill, just enough to injure if unnoticed. But the line was crossed the night Brooke's horse, Reggie, came in from the field with a deliberate slice across his chest. Clean, targeted, intentional. Not a kick, not a fence injury, a blade. That was the moment the case left the realm of civil hostility and entered criminal territory with teeth. Brooke didn't cry, Brooke documented. She photographed, measured, time-stamped, and logged it before she called me or the vet. Rhonda didn't panic. Rhonda locked the property down and started checking every paddock line for entry points. I didn't call Karen, I called Ted. He didn't tell me it would be okay. He didn't soothe. He said exactly what needed to be said. "Good. Now we have aggravated animal cruelty on record. This is the breaking point." Because courts don't shrug at forged signatures, and they don't ever shrug at knives taken to horses. Karen thought violence would force surrender. All she did was move herself from a civil defendant to a criminal one, with witnesses, time-stamped evidence, and a documented pattern of escalation. And she still hadn't hit her final charge. Ted didn't return alone that time. He arrived with a camera case, evidence tags, and a tone that meant the posture of the situation had officially shifted. "This is no longer about stopping her," he said. "This is about building the record that convicts her." He processed the slash on Reggie like a crime scene. Latex gloves, scale ruler, directional lighting, chain of custody bag for the fibers Brooke found snagged in the cut. Then he walked the perimeter again, not like a trespass check this time, but like someone mapping entry routes for prosecution. "Whoever did this knew horses," he said. "They cut where it would bleed but not kill. Someone wanted injury, not loss. Intentional harm without death. That's not anger. That's strategy." By that point, every escalation had been logged, photographed, time-stamped, and duplicated in both binders and encrypted drive. And still, Karen believed she was tightening control. What she never understood is that control and exposure are inverse forces. The more she acted, the more she incriminated herself. And there was still one card Ted hadn't played, the one he was saving for when the criminal case would eventually hit a courtroom. The history. Because when a defendant claims coincidence, courts look backward at pattern. And Karen Livingston wasn't just a woman committing sabotage. She was the daughter of a convicted land felon repeating a generational crime against the same family. Judges don't call that coincidence. They call that motive. As Ted built the case outward, he also tightened it inward, meaning he wasn't just gathering proof of what Karen was doing, he was building the chain that connected her to the acts personally. She's not reckless, he said. She's delegating, meaning Karen wasn't putting flyers on cars herself. She was ordering others to. She wasn't cutting breakers. Someone else was following instruction. She wasn't slashing Reggie. Someone loyal to her was acting on her behalf. Delegation is how cowards commit felonies without fingerprints. But delegation only works until one link in the chain breaks, and Ted was waiting for that fracture. People who act for others always assume immunity, he said. They stop covering their tracks sooner than the person who ordered them. So we watched, documented, and held position. Not because we were passive, but because premature confrontation would shorten the rope she was currently hanging herself with. Rhonda said it best. She thinks this is pressure. She has no idea she's already in discovery. And she was. Every action from that point forward was not harassment in motion, but evidence accruing. Meanwhile, Karen believed we were silent because we were cornered. She never considered we were silent because we were preparing. And she still had one last escalation to make, the one that would trigger the first official legal strike from our side. She made it sooner than Ted predicted. The breaking point didn't arrive with drama, it arrived with entitlement. 2 weeks after the slashing, a formal envelope appeared at my gate, hand-delivered, not mailed. Inside was a Notice of Imminent Annexation Compliance Review, printed on HOA letterhead and signed, not by the board, but by Karen Livingston herself, as if she possessed statutory authority. It outlined transition expectations, including restrictions on livestock count, architectural conformity mandates, required fencing alterations, future approval process for business operations, all written as if jurisdiction already existed. Not proposed, declared. Brooke read it once and said, she just admitted intent in writing. Rhonda read it and said, and she dated it. Good. I didn't respond to Karen. I didn't send a letter. I didn't call. I handed it to Ted. He didn't look irritated. He looked satisfied. This is the document that justifies the first formal action, he said. She crossed into legal assertion without authority. That's actionable. And because the fraudulent annexation petition already existed, this notice didn't stand alone. It connected intent to method. We weren't dealing with rumor anymore. We now had forgery, annexation petition with falsified signature, harassment and operational interference documented, aggravated animal cruelty documented, unauthorized regulatory assertion in writing. That isn't HOA conflict. That is a prosecutable chain. And Karen still believed she was winning. Ted moved fast after that notice, not with confrontation, but with locking the door behind her without her knowing it. He drew up the first cease and desist draft, but he didn't send it. Timing matters more than content in wars like this. You don't serve it yet, he said. You wait until she escalates one more level. And she will. You want the cease and desist to land on the same week as her next offense. That ties pattern to consequence. He wasn't planning to warn her. He was planning to corner her. Because once you put someone like Karen on formal legal notice, everything she does after that becomes willful, not ignorant. Judges don't treat willful violations lightly. Rhonda asked the only strategic question that mattered. Where do we hit her first, civil or criminal? Ted didn't hesitate. Both, but not in the same week, because the goal wasn't to stop her. The goal was to end her. And ending someone legally requires sequence, not impulse. So we waited. Cameras were installed quietly under rooflines. Delivery drivers were told to alert us to anyone asking questions about our orders. Frank increased presence at the property line on his side. Brooke rerouted client communication to a controlled channel. Rhonda built redundancy into utilities so sabotage wouldn't disrupt function again. We were not bracing, we were positioning. And right on schedule, as if scripted, Karen delivered the next escalation that triggered the first legal strike. It came on a Thursday. Escalation always lands on a weekday, never a weekend, because people who weaponize bureaucracy think in business hours. A certified letter arrived, this time mailed, not delivered by hand. The envelope was thick, deliberate, and stamped with urgency. Inside was a pre-compliance violation packet, outlining alleged infractions as if Vista Hills already held jurisdiction. Unapproved agricultural density, non-conforming outbuildings, public safety risk due to unmanaged traffic, unauthorized commercial operation within residential adjacency. Every line was written in the language of authority, not suggestion. And attached at the back was the most damning page of all, a formal threat of fines if adjustments were not made voluntarily prior to mandatory enforcement. That single line changed the category again. Because in law, the difference between harassment and extortion is one word: money. Ted read it once and didn't even sit down. That's it, he said. This is where we hit. Because that letter did 3 things Karen didn't realize she had just done. Claimed jurisdiction she does not legally possess. Threatened financial penalties based on that false authority. Placed it in certified writing under her own name. That is no longer annexation pressure. That is attempted unlawful enforcement with financial coercion. Brooke didn't look anxious. She looked satisfied. There's your trigger, she said. Rhonda simply picked up the evidence binder and slid the packet inside. The war had just crossed the line from preparation to engagement. And not on her terms, on ours. Ted didn't react to the packet with outrage. Outrage is for people who still think they're being wronged. Ted reacted like someone who had just been handed the final puzzle piece. Now we serve, he said. He drafted the cease and desist, not soft, not polite, written in the language of someone who has seen juries convict for less. Illegal assumption of jurisdiction, attempted unlawful regulation, fraudulent annexation filing, harassment and business interference, property sabotage, animal injury under aggravated classification, and at the bottom in clean, unemotional ink, failure to cease will result in immediate civil and criminal action. He didn't mail it. He didn't email it. He waited, envelope sealed, on purpose. You never fire the first legal shot on your breath, he said. You fire it on theirs. Meaning, you serve it the same week they escalate. So the paper trail shows direct response, not ambush. He stood there with the document in hand and said the line that reset the room. From this moment forward, she is not your antagonist. She is your defendant. And that shift is everything. You don't argue with defendants. You build the case that buries them. While Ted prepared the delivery strategy, the farm ran as if nothing was happening. Because the worst thing you can do to someone who is trying to destabilize you is to remain operational and unaffected. Karen had made her move. Ours was next, and it would not be noise. It would be legal teeth. Karen must have believed the certified packet would rattle us into movement. People who abuse process always expect immediate compliance. Instead, nothing changed on our end. Horses were worked. Clients were taught. Feed was delivered. No reply. No panic. Silence is a weapon when the other side expects collapse. And predictably, Silence made her escalate again. 3 days after the packet, a drone appeared over the cross-country field. Not high, low. Low enough to read ear tags on livestock, low enough to count horses, low enough to record. It hovered, slow and deliberate, not like a hobbyist looking at scenery, like surveillance collecting evidence for a case that didn't exist. Brooke walked out with her phone recording and said one sentence, not to the drone, to the record. "This is unauthorized aerial surveillance over private agricultural land." The drone jerked higher, then retreated, which told us what we needed. Someone was operating it from close range and fled when observed. That video became Exhibit 47. Ted didn't even look surprised when we sent it to him. "She's harvesting visuals to justify seizure," he said. "Good. Now we have surveillance to pair with the forgery and coercion." That same afternoon, Karen attempted contact again, this time via email, sent to the lesson program inbox, not to me directly, as if speaking through a public channel would create implied legitimacy. The email referenced cross-compliance inspections and stated she would return with a board observer. That was her mistake, because the moment she announced a return visit, in writing, tied to her name, Ted didn't wait another day. He slid the cease and desist into an envelope, sealed it, and said, "She made the approach. Now we hit back." Karen didn't know the cease and desist was already drafted when she scheduled her return. She expected to arrive again as the aggressor. Instead, she walked straight into the moment the war turned. Ted insisted it be delivered face-to-face, not for theatrics, but for record. "If she is served in person, she cannot later claim she didn't receive it," he said. Rhonda and Brooke were present, not as backup muscle, but as witnesses of service. Their signatures would later anchor the chain of delivery. Karen arrived with the same posture she wore the first day, clipboard held like a governing seal, expression fixed in entitled calm. She started speaking before she even reached the gate. "As I stated in writing, we are proceeding with—" She didn't finish. Ted stepped forward, not aggressive, not emotional, just absolute. He handed her the envelope and spoke with a clarity that leaves no foothold for misinterpretation. "You are being formally ordered to cease all contact. Attempts at regulation and interference with this property and its business operations. Further action will trigger both civil and criminal proceedings." Karen tried to answer, but she was legally served mid-sentence. Anything she said after that would be post-notice liability. Ted didn't let her turn it into dialogue. "This conversation is over," he said. "You are now on notice." Her face changed for the first time. Not fear, not humility. Confusion. People who expect obedience never know what to do when confronted with enforcement. She looked at me then, as if I might contradict Ted or soften it. I didn't say a word. Silence again. Used precisely. Karen left without the confidence she arrived with. And that mattered. Not because she felt something, but because from that moment on, every move she made would carry a legal multiplier, knowingly, after formal notice. Karen thought she was opening a case. She had just walked into one already built against her. The gate closed behind her and the air changed. Not lighter, not safer, just defined. There is a psychological shift once a cease and desist is served. The burden of danger doesn't vanish. It transfers. The risk is no longer ours. It is hers. Brooke exhaled once and said, "She's going to hit back harder." Rhonda didn't disagree. "Good. The harder she hits now, the worse it buries her." Ted looked at me then, not for permission, not for reassurance, but to mark the line in time. "From here forward," he said, "you don't react to anything she does. You record it. The next time she crosses a line, we don't warn. We file." He glanced toward the fields, the barns, the road back toward Vista Hills. "And trust me," he added, "she will cross it." He was right. People like Karen don't retreat when challenged. They double down out of pride, not strategy. Pride makes them sloppy. Sloppy makes them convictable. That night I made no speeches, no declarations, no plans spoken aloud. I fed horses, locked gates, turned off aisle lights, and went to bed with one resolved truth anchoring in my chest. I didn't go to bed fearing what she would do next. I went to bed knowing every move from this point forward would work in my favor, not hers. The shift had already happened. I was no longer preparing for a fight. I was building its record. And by the time she realized that, it would already be too late.